In the second section, I will introduce the graphical method to describe quantitative data and qualitative data we learned in the class. So if you recall, unlike the quantitative data, which the distribution can be described by its central tendency, mean, median, mode, or its variability, variance, and standard deviation, for qualitative data, we have to create some frequency table to describe and understand the distribution and pattern of the data. So to create a frequency table, we can simply use the tabulate command. So please click on the session 2 example to work with me on practicing the Stata command. So this is a data set where I have, if you browse the data through data editor, now we have several qualitative variable and several quantitative variable. If you quickly summarize all the variables, you see that for those quantitative data, you do have a mean and a standard deviation that's calculated and shown for you. However, for those qualitative data, you do not find any numerical metrics that presents or that describe their information. Okay, so actually, if you look at the data editor tool, sometimes the qualitative data are indicated in a different color. This is where, if you click on the data and in the property section, you see the type of the data is described as a string. Basically, this is only a text in each table cell. Therefore, Stata will not recognize them as numerical values. Okay, so they will not be able to provide any summary statistics for you. However, you can still understand this qualitative data by creating a frequency table. For example, you can create a frequency table for the major of the students in our data. So the simple command would just be tab or tabulate and the variable name. Here, I do not use a plural. This means that this tabulation, you have to create a frequency table for just one variable at once. So for example, I can first try tabulate major, and you see a frequency table. We have 3 majors, and you have frequency, the percent, and the cumulative percent. Right? It's the same thing if you use the abbreviation tab. Okay. So the next one is that you have some options after the tab command. For example, you can use comma sort so that the frequency will be sorted in order. Let's try another qualitative data. For example, country. Okay, so we have several countries listed here. So if you'd like to list order the countries in terms of its frequency, you can do tab country comma sort. Okay, so the US, which has the highest frequency, goes to the first in this frequency table. This is sometimes useful when you, for example, want to find the MODA category for your sample. Another option is to have comma missing. This is the idea of percent and a valid percent we talked about. So actually, in our country dataset, we do not have any missing values. I just created another column that's called country missing, and I purposely deleted the first 3 observations. So basically, we do have some missing values in this variable. So now instead, if I tab the country missing variable, I just directly click this variable name from the variable window so that I don't have to type all the letters. And I click enter, Actually, now we see a frequency table for only 27 observations. These are called valid percent or valid frequency table. If you'd like to include the missing values as an additional category, what you can do is to tab. Actually, I can click on my history comment and make some edits, and comma missing. If you click enter, actually it will include all 30 observations for you and tells you that you do have a missing category which includes 3 observations. Okay, so if you do tab missing, also sort, you're going to see again the categories are sorted according to its frequency or count. And use Help tab to take a look at the full Stata menu. But basically, these are some of the commonly used options. Now I'm going to introduce the graphical method for qualitative data we learned in this course. The major graphical method for descriptive statistics includes graph box, which already introduced in the first session, graph pie, graph bar, including the horizontal bar, and the histogram. I will introduce the histogram in later sessions. And today I will focus on the graph pie, the pie chart, and the graph bar, the bar graph. If you'd like to learn and work on more graphical methods for describing data, take a look at this link and you have many Stata graphic menus there. Okay, so if you recall, the pie chart, basically the categories of the qualitative variables are represented by a slice of a pie. So the basic comment of a pie chart is just graph pie, comma, over. Remember here you have a cat variable showing that you do have to provide a categorical data or a qualitative data within the parentheses. Okay, so let's try to provide a pie graph for maybe the major. So graph pie over major. Major is a categorical variable, so it will work. So click enter. You will see a graph pie, a pie chart here that's generated for you from the most basic comment that you have. Okay. Of course, there are a variety of options that you can use. For example, the other common option is to provide a label, provide a value percent on the label. So for example, I can add p label underscore O%. And here you have the percent that is labeled on each slice of pie. Another option is sometimes you may have some pies that are relatively small. Let me try to graph pie for country over country. Okay, so you have many countries, some pies are really small. So in order to emphasize one of the pie or one of the countries that you particularly want to show, you can actually, let me add the label O%. You can edit an individual pie, say I want the second pie to explode. Actually, within the parentheses of pie number 2, you can add a lot more other options. Okay, so comma here. So the second pie is actually a little bit exploded here. These are just the basic comments of creating a pie chart. There are so many options where you can continue to add your font size, the color of the pie, and a lot of other legend and title and so on. But instead of working on creating a lot more options on the command, I actually recommend you to work with the Stata graph editor. So every time you create, for example, a pie chart, for example, the basic command could be graph pie over, and you want to label the percent, you also want to label the name. So if that's the case, p label o name, you will see some basic pie graph where you do have some nice legend and some nice colors showing the pie, but usually the percent and the name of the label is actually overlaps with each other. So this has to be corrected by a graph editor. So you can simply, in this graph window, click on graph editor. So start graph editor. Okay. You can also start the graph editor from File, Start Graph Editor, but we have an icon here in the toolbar. So once it's on, basically you will see some additional window on the left and on the right. On the left, actually, you can actually select an object, use this select tool, or you can actually add additional text at anywhere in your figure. Okay, but normally I would be using the left-hand side of the objects. For example, in this legend part, you can add a caption or a subtitle. So for example, I can add a title in my figure, for example, figure 1 pie chart on student major. You can edit the size or the color or the margin of your text box and so on. Okay, so this is where I added a title. If I want to, so I'm adding a title under the legend. If I'd like to add a title for my whole figure, I think it's this option. Figure 1 pie chart. Okay, so usually it's on the top of the pie chart, but of course you can move around and change the font size and so on. Okay, if you do not want additional title on the legend, you can right-click this box and just hide it, or you can just delete from your left editor windows. Okay. Also, what I wanted to do is to correct for the overlapping of the two labels. Okay, so if I already provided the name of each pie, I can also click on this legend box, right click and say I'd like to hide the legend. It's really up to you, or you can undo what you just did. Okay. Of course, if you select on any text box, on the right hand side, the associated function or property is also selected here. So you can either right click on it and go to the properties to change the font, or you can go to the associated bars to change for that. So for example, I'd like to change the color into white. Okay. So you have so many different options for further editing and provide advanced editing to the to your figure. Okay. And of course, once you're done, you first want to save it as a Stata graph, because later on you can directly open this graph in Stata and continue to edit your graph. And if you're happy with it, of course, you can also save another PDF version. But I always recommend you to save a Stata graph version. Okay? So, but I'm going to not save it. So the next one is a bar graph. If you recall, basically the categories or the classes of the qualitative variable can be represented by bars, where the height of the bar can be represented by frequency or percent, right? Unlike a pie chart where you have to have a round pie that is 100%, so you can only show relative frequency or percent for each slice of bar. For a bar graph, for each slice of pie, but for a bar graph, basically you have more flexibilities on your vertical axis. You can show frequency, relative frequency, or percent on the vertical axis. Okay, so again, let's start from the basic comment, which is graph bar over the categorical data. So graph bar, let's do over, maybe we have other categorical data, maybe student status. We only have two, and it's actually 50% and 50%, right? So as you see, the default vertical axis for a bar graph is percent. If you'd like to take a look at show other vertical axes, you have to include a count to show the frequency. Okay, so for example, you can show graph bar, parenthesis, count. And now your vertical axis, you actually have 15 graduate students and 15 undergraduate students. The relative frequency is just 0.5, 0.5. The percent is just 50% and 50%. Okay. By the way, you can also use the graph editor to, for example, change the label on the horizontal axis, vertical axis, and add a title and so on. I'm not going to go over the graph editors anymore. Okay. Another good option is within that categorical variable, you can also sort your bar according to the height of the bar. So basically what you do, let's try graph bar. Frequency is good over, relative frequency is good, and over country, because we do have some variation in the country. Okay, so if you'd like to sort the bar, basically what you do is within the over, which basically controls your horizontal axis. So you can add sort 1, that basically sorts your graph bar ascendingly. If you put reverse, it will sort the bar descendingly. Okay. Of course, this is a good case where probably providing a horizontal bar might be more helpful, although you can use the graph editor to reduce the font size for the country name. But we can do a graph H bar instead. Keep all the other options, click enter. So we have a horizontal bar graph created for you. Okay. So the comment is graph H bar. So you can try both. If you'd like to save it as a horizontal bar or a vertical bar, it's up to you. The next thing that I want to talk a little bit is that actually the bar graph can also be used to present continuous variables. However, for example, now let me show graph bar age. Okay, I'm not going to do over something because remember, over within the parentheses, it has to be categorical data. So to create a graph bar for continuous variable, you just need to show graph bar. Okay, and age is a continuous variable. If I click enter, you actually only see one bar, and it shows the default, shows the mean of the age. So the mean of the age for our sample is 25 years old. So usually this does not look good in terms of presenting additional information than saying that the mean of this quantitative data is 25. But it could be very useful if you create a bar graph for the continuous variable summarized over other categorical variables. Let's start with a bar graph over one categorical variable. For example, you can, let's maybe graph the SAT scores. You can graph the SAT scores. If you just do that, it's the mean of the score. But if you continue to summarize that mean of the score over gender, you can actually compare the average SAT score between female student and a male student. Okay, you can also graph bar SAT over major to look at the average SAT score across different major students with different majors. Okay, again, you still have some flexibility on your vertical axis, although the default is the mean, but you can ask Stata to provide, for example, count or median. So now I'm going to graph the SAT score based on the median instead. So graph bar median SAT. You need to put the median first and then over major. Okay, so on the vertical axis, you actually have P50 of SAT. Later on, you can change the label so that for general audience, if they do not know what does P50 means, which is percentile 50, you can show the median of SAT scores. Okay. Next, you can also summarize the bar graph with continuous variables over two categorical variables. You just need to continue to write over the first categorical data or variable and over the second categorical variable. You only need one comma so that all the options after comma are just, you do not need to provide additional comma there. So for example, I can graph the SAT score over gender and also over major. If I do that, basically we have a little bit more complicated graph, but it's a lot more informative, right? So we can compare among female students their performance from different majors, or among, basically you fix for the major, you can compare the performance between male and female students and so on. So you can provide and show more information here. By the way, it matters whether you put gender first or whether you put major first. So this is the case if you put gender first, basically your first horizontal bar will be divided by gender. But if you do the other way around, major and then gender, so then the first horizontal bar will be major, and basically your sample is first divided or summarized over gender and then is summarized over major. So both graphs are basically summarizing a continuous variable and over categorical information. This type of graphs are very common and very informative. Right? So this type of graph can also be applied to box plot. Okay, you can also create a box plot over one or two categorical variables. So for example, now instead of say graph bar, I'm going to graph box plot, graph box SAT over the two categorical data. If you click enter, you see some box plot there, where actually you see some variations on the median, and you see some differences in the interquartile range and other information, so that you can provide a more informative information to describe your data.